Now that we've laid out the major components of the cardiovascular system and discussed the cardiac cycle, let's dive more deeply into some other terminology that we'll need to understand as far as how the heart functions. The first thing that we're going to look at is a term called stroke volume. Stroke volume is the volume of blood ejected from a ventricle during one contraction. Now, if we look at our previous figures that we had utilized previously, on the left we have our pressure volume loop, and on the right we have our Wiggers diagram. So stroke volume is going to be the amount of blood ejected with one contraction, so that would be the end-diastolic volume, or the amount of blood that's in the ventricle after it has filled, minus the end-systolic volume, which is the amount of blood in the heart after it has contracted. So in our flow volume loop, the end-diastolic volume is represented by this volume here, which would be the same throughout this phase of ventricular contraction. On our Wiggers diagram, we have our end-diastolic volume shown here. End-systolic volume is the amount of blood after the ventricle has ejected, so that will be represented by this line, which is the line which correlates with isovolumetric ventricular relaxation. And on our Wiggers diagram, it will be this volume here. Now, as we look at things that affect stroke volume, we have to kind of reassess the functional unit of striated muscle, and that's the sarcomere. So recall that in skeletal muscle, we said that sarcomere length prior to stimulation will affect the amount of tension that's created. So this was our graph that we had used in the previous lecture, and this area that's highlighted in tan represents what we called the optimal length, so that with skeletal muscle, we are always getting near optimal tension when we stimulate a skeletal muscle. In cardiac muscle, stretch of the sarcomeres also impacts the tension that's created, but it does so through some different mechanisms. One role that's similar is that it does seem to optimize the actin and myosin geometric alignment, which allows for better interaction between the two. But this actually seems to be a less important mechanism compared to the stretching of the cardiac myofibrils appears to increase the sensitivity to calcium. So by increasing troponin's sensitivity to calcium, that means more troponin is bound, more cross bridges are exposed, or more binding sites are exposed for cross bridges to form, and that results in more cross bridge formation and therefore more tension. So the net result is a greater contractile force with the same amount of calcium being released, or as we state here, the same calcium signal. Now, a term that we have used previously, and this is just to revisit that, is the concept of venous return. So recall that the blood that's being ejected from the heart is called the cardiac output, and the blood that then returns to the heart is called the venous return. And the venous return is what is going to then determine the end-diastolic volume. So what we have drawn here is this is what we call a cardiac function curve. So this demonstrates the stroke volume that results from a particular end-diastolic volume. Recall when we covered veins, we said that veins are volume reservoirs or capacitance vessels. Their primary function is the ability to hold on to blood. If we vasoconstrict the veins, that's going to stiffen the veins and will reduce their capacitance by reducing their compliance. This is achieved by sympathetically stimulating the veins, and they have alpha receptors. So when we stimulate the veins and activate these alpha receptors, it causes those walls to stiffen, it causes the veins to vasoconstrict, and when that occurs, the blood is returned to the heart. Recall that veins have valves, so that when we constrict the veins, the blood can't be forced backwards, it's all going to return to the heart. So if we increase venous return, we will be increasing end-diastolic volume. And if we increase end-diastolic volume, we'll be moving to the right along our cardiac function curve, which means we'll also be increasing stroke volume. That relationship is referred to as the Frank-Starling Mechanism. Other ways that we can affect venous return is by what's called the skeletal muscle pump. So here I have drawn, imagine this is a lower extremity, very simplified, with our skeletal muscles, and here I have this drawn as though we only have one large vein in our leg, which is clearly not the case, but this is just for instructional purposes. So realize that when we are exercising and our muscles are contracting, the muscles are going to be compressing these veins. And when they do so, it's going to cause the blood to move. Because we have valves in the veins, the blood can't go backwards, so that means the skeletal muscle pump is going to work to help increase venous return. We also have something we refer to as the respiratory pump. We will be talking about the pulmonary system in our next section, but for now, let's just look at some very simple concepts. One is that our heart is located in the thoracic cavity along with the lungs. Blood is returning to the heart because of pressure differences, which means the pressures in the veins, even though they are low, they are still higher than the pressure in the right atrium, and that's why blood returns back to the heart. When we breathe and we inhale, our thoracic cavity volume increases in size. When you increase the volume of a container, the pressure within that container decreases. So when we breathe in and the pressure in the thoracic cavity decreases, that's actually going to increase venous return. Now, as we look at sympathetically stimulating the heart, sympathetic stimulation of the heart has a couple of different important effects. Recall that in addition to stimulating the SA node and the AV node, sympathetics also innervate the ventricular muscle, and the ventricular muscle has beta-1 receptors. When these beta-1 receptors on the ventricular muscle are stimulated, it results in an increased influx of calcium, and this occurs through those L-type calcium channels. It also will result in increased release of calcium from the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So as the combined effects of these two on calcium, this larger calcium signal results in more cross-bridge formation. Additionally, sympathetic stimulation has an impact on troponin. And although troponin still binds to calcium very readily, the sympathetic stimulation of troponin interacts with it in such a way that it causes the calcium to be released more readily. Additionally, sympathetic stimulation increases the activity of what are called SERCA, and that stands for smooth endoplasmic reticulum calcium ATPase. So that's the enzyme that's responsible for sequestering the calcium back into the sarcoplasmic reticulum. So the combined effects of that can be shown on this particular graph. This shows time on the x-axis and tension on the y-axis. And what we have in blue, this represents, let's say, our standard myocardial contraction, creating a certain amount of tension over this period of time. If we sympathetically stimulate the cardiac muscle, what we see is a more forceful contraction, and this is due to the increased calcium signal that we showed on the previous slide. Additionally, we'll also see that the contraction relaxes much more rapidly, also related to the sympathetic effect on troponin as well as on SERCA. So myocardial contractive force in response to sympathetic stimulation, we have a more forceful contraction, and the term that we use for that is inotropy, and this would be an effect of positive inotropy because it's more forceful. And then the more rapid relaxation, the term that describes the relaxation is called lucitropy. So this is the overall net effect of sympathetic stimulation of ventricular muscle. Here is our cardiac function curve, and this is going to demonstrate the effect of sympathetic stimulation on ventricular muscle. And the term that we use as far as this positive inotropic effect is this term called contractility. So here is our standard, let's say, venous return in diastolic volume, giving us this particular stroke volume. If we sympathetically stimulate this ventricular muscle at the same end-diastolic volume, the net result is it's going to give us a greater stroke volume. So in essence, what this is doing is it's shifting the entire cardiac function curve upward. So for the same end-diastolic volume, we get an increased stroke volume. Recall that parasympathetics do not have any meaningful innervation of ventricular muscle, but we can reduce contractility by simply decreasing sympathetic stimulation of the ventricular muscle. So let's put all this information together on one slide. Here we have our end-diastolic volume giving us a specific stroke volume. By sympathetically stimulating the ventricular muscle, this will give us an increased stroke volume. So this is an instance of increasing contractility. This is the effect of sympathetic stimulation giving us a more forceful contraction at the same end-diastolic volume. If we increase our end-diastolic volume, and that would be achieved by sympathetically stimulating alpha receptors on our veins, that's going to give us a greater stroke volume. And this change here, from here to here, this increase in stroke volume, that is defined as the Frank-Starling mechanism. So these are two separate mechanisms that can increase stroke volume. Now what we'll see is that oftentimes in our body, these two things are happening together. So we'll see that both the effect of increasing end-diastolic volume and increasing contractility will give us a greater stroke volume. So increased contractility, again, is a function of sympathetic stimulation. Now there's a term that we can use that can help to give us a measure of contractility. And let's look at how we come up with that here. So let's say that our standard end-diastolic volume is about 145 milliliters. Particular end-diastolic volume would give us a specific stroke volume. And let's say that the stroke volume here is about 80 milliliters. So if we start with an end-diastolic volume of 145 and we eject 80 milliliters, then our end-systolic volume would be 65 milliliters. The term that we can use to measure contractility is called ejection fraction. And ejection fraction is the fraction of blood that's ejected from the heart. So it's the stroke volume divided by the end-diastolic volume. So for our initial example, if we took our stroke volume of 80 and divided it by 145, that would give us an ejection fraction of approximately 55%. And that's a fairly standard ejection fraction in a healthy heart at rest. Let's show what happens to the ejection fraction if we increase contractility. So again, we're going to keep our end-diastolic volume the same. However, because we're going to sympathetically stimulate the ventricular muscle, we are going to jump up to this curve and give us a greater stroke volume. So here, let's say that the stroke volume went from 80 to 90 milliliters. That means our end-systolic volume would go down to 55 milliliters. The ejection fraction in this case would be 90 divided by 45. So by sympathetically stimulating the ventricular muscle, we just saw an increase in ejection fraction from 55% to 62%. So stroke volume can be modulated by a few different mechanisms. Modulate means to adjust. We can adjust stroke volume by sympathetic stimulation of the beta-1 receptors. This would be a change or an increase in contractility. That would be manifested as an increase in ejection fraction. We can also modulate stroke volume by changing end-diastolic volume. And we achieve that by alpha stimulation on veins, increasing venous return. This is our Frank-Starling mechanism. So the next term that we have is cardiac output. So cardiac output is the volume of blood ejected from each ventricle per minute. So that means that's going to be the stroke volume times the heart rate. So if we want to look at how do we modulate or regulate cardiac output, we can do so by affecting stroke volume. So if we want to change cardiac output, we can do so by sympathetic stimulation. Sympathetic stimulation of the veins would increase end-diastolic volume, which would increase stroke volume. We could change contractility, and that would be achieved by sympathetic stimulation of beta-1 receptors on the ventricular muscle. We could also affect cardiac output by changing heart rate. And as we've covered before, sympathetic stimulation and parasympathetic stimulation are what are responsible for that. Sympathetic stimulation, working on beta-1 receptors, increases heart rate. Parasympathetic stimulation, working on muscarinic receptors, decreases heart rate.